So if you're an aspiring off-gridder, then watch this video, because today we're going to talk about the million-dollar question. Is it cheaper to live off-grid? The answer is heck no, or yes, maybe. The truth is it depends on a lot of factors, and they are different for every instance. So some of those factors are: how much electricity do you use now? How much are you willing to compromise? How much are you willing to conserve? How large is your family? It's probably a lot cheaper to be off-grid as an individual than it is to have a family of 4, because your demand is more. So we're going to talk about some of those factors. All right, I'm not going to get too far in the weeds and go into too much detail in this video. We'll be doing a whole series of videos when we do our new renewable energy system. But for this video, there seems to be a lot of argument about what is off-grid. And so for us, I define off-grid as being disconnected from any public utility for which you have to pay a monthly bill, like the electric company or the water company or the sewer or whatever. We're off-grid with the exception of internet, because we pay an internet service provider every month. One of the factors that will determine whether it's cheaper to be off-grid versus on-grid is how large is your family. Each person in your family is going to have a certain level of demand for energy, whether that's water or electric or whatever. The larger your family, the bigger the system is that you're going to have to accommodate that family. Much cheaper if you live by yourself in a cabin in the woods and you don't really need that much. For us, we have a family of 4, and so our demand increases the more people take showers, the more laundry we have to do, and those kinds of things. Each one of those things that consumes energy is a factor that you have to look at and decide, do I want to do this more conveniently, or am I willing to invest more time and labor into doing this manually? And so that's a big decision that you have to make for everything that consumes energy. So it's basically a time versus money calculation, and everybody has to make that determination for themselves. For example, you can do your laundry by hand. We've done it. It's not fun. It takes a long time and quite a bit of labor, and the productivity just isn't there. You can get an old school wringer washer type deal that does not require electricity, improves your efficiency a little bit more. You can get a washing machine and then toss your laundry in, hit the button and go, but that requires electricity. How much electricity does that require? That's going to be part of how you design your system. All of those loads are going to stack up. Another example is water. You can haul water from a water source and have that, requires no electricity. You can plumb in a hand well pump, like a hydrant, requires no electricity. Requires less labor if you're hand pumping up a hill or whatever. Or you install a complete electrical pumping system that automatically runs anytime you turn on the faucet and you have water. So it's a matter of time versus money versus convenience. So we've done quite a few of these calculations in terms of figuring out what these variables are for our situation. And in the first video of this series where we talked about why we're off-grid, I mentioned the system that we do have. This is the system that came with our property. And this system, as it sits, is about 20% of what we actually need based on everything I've calculated. When we got this system, all these panels were wired in series. They were producing 12 to 13, 14 volts. The challenge is they're all wired together with small wire, and they have to push the current about 280 feet down the hill to the battery bank. So by the time it gets down there, voltage is low, the amps aren't there, just wouldn't charge the batteries. The battery bank itself is made up of used batteries of different ages and different sizes, and I'm not sure what the actual amp hour capacity of it is all put together. So it's a big question mark for us. We know that we're producing now. I've rewired this. I've rewired these 2 in series, these 3 in series, and then 2 of these as 2 separate strings in parallel. And it's pushing 30 some watts down the hill, and at peak times we're getting like 7-8 amps, which is about I've gotten about 260 watts when the sun is super high at the right time. And so I get 1.2 maybe kilowatt hours a day. Based on our calculations, we really need about 6 kilowatt hours a day. And so that's the basis from which I'm going to design our next system. Once I do the next system, I can use all these components to power our barn eventually, or a secondary water pump as a backup, but all these things will be repurposed, so that's good. Which brings me to, when you get into the weeds and start designing your system and coming up with which type of voltage you want to use and how much power you need, it really helps to do your homework up front before you start buying things and then just spending money that later you'll regret spending. So as an example of that, I upgraded the charge controller we have, which works way better. It's an MPPT controller now. But when I did that, I left the battery bank as a 12-volt battery bank and bought a 12-volt inverter. It's a pure sine wave inverter. So if I wanted to reconfigure all of that into a 24-volt system, I would now have to get another inverter that works with 24 volts. And so that's one thing I did that I wish I wouldn't have, but it's okay because I'll still be able to use that component, like I said, in our future well situation or barn. So just be aware of that when you're designing stuff like this so that you can repurpose it later. So as I mentioned, this system right now is about 20% of what we need. And so we have to make up for that need by using a generator, which costs money in diesel. And we use two different generators. We use our big generator just about every day to run our well pump. It runs on diesel. During the winter, when we were having 3, 4, 5 days of not very much sun, these panels couldn't charge the batteries. We had to run the generator more often to keep the batteries charged so that we had energy at night. We also use a small generator that's gas powered. It's a little Honda. It's super efficient and super quiet. It runs about 8 hours on a little bit less than a gallon of gas, but it still costs money in gas. If I'm doing an editing session that's a pretty long one, I have to run the computer off of that little generator because this system just won't power the desktop computer that we have. Now we use propane also to run our stove, our outside grill, our hot water heater, and we go through maybe 2 15-pound cans a month. Costs us about $12 to refill each one of those, which is a real good deal. But that's monthly cost in propane. So adding all of the cost of propane, gas, and diesel in order to get the energy we need to run the things we need to run, it's costing us almost the same as paying an electric bill, and we're not using nearly the energy. And so our challenge is we need to be able to size our new system to accommodate all of our needs without having to run a generator and without having to use as much propane. So one of the kind of variables that I'm going by is comparing being off-grid to what it used to cost us before every month in electric. And I go by, it costs us, I'll say, $2,200 a year in electricity. So I want to be able to build a system that accommodates all of our energy needs that over 7 to 10 years will cost us less than $2,200 a year. The challenge when building a renewable energy system is all of the cost is up front. There are programs you can get into where you can lease or finance this type of stuff, where you're getting in bed with the power company or a solar installer. Some people do net metering and this and that. All my research into that is determined that you don't really ever come out on top in those situations unless you're completely autonomous and own your own system and all of the headaches and maintenance that goes along with it. Then you really aren't free. Now, if you're willing to make compromises and sacrifices, do a complete audit of all the energy you use, and figure out alternative ways to do those same tasks, either using less electricity or no electricity, then you can build a system that is financially economical compared to being on grid. For our system, we need to build a 6 kilowatt hour system, meaning a system that can provide us 6 kilowatt hours of energy per day, and a battery system that has 3 days of autonomy that allows us to live through 3 cloudy days without the batteries being charged. And that's about a 1.5 to 2 kilowatt solar system. If we get 4 sun hours a day and we're getting 1.5 kilowatt hours, we'll be able to generate 6 kilowatt hours in solar energy and then have a battery bank that can store 3 days worth of that power. That's my goal. Now, where we are, we get a lot of wind on certain days. When the wind decides to blow, it blows good. It blows good enough that we can put a wind turbine up on the top of this hill or down at the bottom of that ridge. And you can generate quite a good bit of power from a wind turbine. And one of the advantages of it, if you are in a place where it has wind, is wind tends to blow in the morning and at night, and on stormy, cloudy days when it's storming, all times when the sun isn't shining. So you can be producing power during those times using wind. Every time I have to start the generator, I kind of die a little inside because it's like I failed. So we want to be able to not have to start the generator unless it's an absolute emergency. Okay, one major factor that will determine the ultimate cost of a renewable energy system for you is your geographic location. We're lucky that where we live, we get 4 to 5, maybe 5.5 peak sun hours a day during the summer. And so our system can be a little smaller, or we can generate more power. If you live in some place like, upper part of Canada where the sun is lower kind of all the time, you're going to get fewer sun hours. The sun isn't going to be as strong. You're going to have a much bigger solar array. But maybe you're in a place where the wind blows quite a bit more. Maybe you can make up for that with a wind turbine. You have to have obviously a kind of open area that gets the most sun you can get during the day, so that may mean removing trees or maybe having to run longer electrical lines from your panels to your battery. There are a lot of geographic considerations when you're building your system that directly affect the cost of it. You might have a really nice flowing stream that you can integrate some sort of hydroelectric solution. There are all kinds of different ways to generate electricity depending on the resources you have available. So if it used to cost us $2,200 a year at about 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and we were using 60 kilowatt hours a day, I don't think we could produce that much power that cheaply if we were trying to do it ourselves. Because before we were only consuming power. If we're trying to build a renewable energy system, we have to generate, store, and consume that power. And so the costs go up considerably. And so to offset that, you have to reduce how much you consume on a regular basis. If you're able to do that and balance all that out, then you can live off-grid cheaper than you can live on-grid. For us, it's a wash. Right now we're spending almost as much money on gas and propane and diesel to offset the limitations of our solar array as we were when we were on-grid paying an electric bill. But we know what we need to do to fix that and improve our system to reduce that down to a manageable number where it's going to give us a payoff of 7 to 10 years. Well, as I said before, building a renewable energy system requires a big upfront investment to do it right, to build the size system that you need, and it requires kind of maintenance. Batteries need to be replaced every so often. Depending on the type of batteries you get, some of them need to be replaced every 5 years, some of them can last you 10, 15 years. And so all those contribute to the design of your system and the cost. We're trying to do this and still remain debt-free. We don't want to get in bed with any of the solar companies, and we don't want to get into any leasing deals, because no upfront cost means there's a cost somewhere on the back end. And like I said, we're trying to do this debt-free and own everything we have. Now, of course, there are some serious hardcore off-gridders who live by themselves without the use of any renewable energy systems at all. They don't use electricity, they don't believe in it and all that. And that's great for them. But for us, we're not interested in trying to recreate an 1800s lifestyle where we are giving up a bunch of modern conveniences that we really don't have to. We're making adjustments where they make sense for us, and we're evaluating how much labor we're willing to trade for that convenience. Are we willing to do more work manually to do simple tasks that we could do with an electrical appliance? And what's the trade-off there? How much time does it take? Because time is the most precious resource we have available. You can't get that back. So if I can spend less time but a little bit more money to accomplish the same task, I'm probably going to do that where it makes sense. And the other factor to that is your physical ability. We're trying to plan and build a system that we're able to use as we get older and are no longer able to do as many of the things manually as we are today. So thinking ahead, investing now to build a system that kind of runs for us in the future, that's where we're at. I hope this has been a little bit helpful in helping you determine whether off-grid is cheaper than on-grid. Like I said, no one can really answer that question but you, and you can't answer that question until you sit down and figure out what you're willing to do, what you're willing to give up, what's important to you, and what you're willing to spend. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this is the second in a 5-part series we're doing about off-grid stuff. The first one we did was why we live off-grid. Tomorrow, or the next video we do, will be in a couple days, will be, do you really need internet off-grid? And then a video on investing money wisely so that you can remain debt-free and still be off-grid. And then the final video will be what we did and how we bought our land, how we found our land, and the process we went through to move off-grid. So I hope this video has been some help to you. I hope to see you in the next video in this series. Make sure you click the bell to be notified, and we'll see you then. Thanks for watching.